2020 will go down in history as one of the most unforgettable years of our lifetime.
And for many, it is a year that we would rather forget, except 2020 will be one of those years that will have history books written just about it.
A year that will be well documented because COVID-19 has caused unprecedented change in every corner of the world.
And we're still living through a turning point in history already. Many describe 2020 as the great disruptor.
In the coming hour, we'll look back at the defining moments of this past year, from a raging pandemic to a volcanic eruption and back-to-back storms that have taken a heavy human and economic toll in the country.
We'll be asking ourselves, what did we learn and how can we do better?
And more importantly, how are we navigating the path to our next normal as we look forward to a brand new year? I'm Rico Hizon.
I'm Pinky Webb.
And I'm Pia Hontiveros. Welcome to a CNN Philippines special presentation.
2020 is a year like no other. We're going to begin the show by having each of us describe the year in a word or two.
Well, for me,
Men first.
not
I
ladies
thought you were going to
first.
say age first. The youngest. Yes, Rico.
The economy,
Seniority. Okay, go ahead.
the economy and digital. I mean, the economy has been battered throughout this year. We fell into a recession. Millions of Filipinos lost their jobs. And digital, we have the micro, the small, and the medium-sized enterprises adapting, becoming resourceful, innovative during this new normal. I mean, Pinky, Pia, we've seen our friends and relatives buying lasagnas, buying chairs, buying all sorts of things online. So it's the economy and digital that has really affected many of our kababayans in 2020.
I think, if for our parents' generation, the Second World War was their life-defining moment, this pandemic is ours. We all made plans for the year. I'm sure you did. And, well, I made one for my family. I typed it all out by month, at the start of the year, and we only got as far as March, and then I just had to crumple it all up, And just to add to what Rico was saying, digital technology, the very thing we thought was keeping us apart before the pandemic is exactly what helped keep us together.
Also, two words, I would say unforgettable, definitely, and it was also a painful. I mean, that's one of the words I would describe 2020, painful for everyone, for families, for employers, for employees, for those who got COVID, for those who unfortunately did not make it. Unforgettable, obviously, because how can you forget 2020?
A very challenging time for our lives. And COVID-19, Pinky, Pia, is almost synonymous to 2020, but there are a few other history-defining moments of the past year.
2020 had a very explosive start. Remember, it was a Sunday. Taal Volcano suddenly rumbled back to life. One of the country's most active volcanoes erupted again after 43 years. We were quick to send our reporters to Batangas. Among them were our senior correspondent David Santos and Trisha Terrada. Let's start with you, Trisha. It was the speed of escalation that surprised so many, that was really so unexpected here, from alert level 1 to 4 in just a matter of hours, maybe 2:30 to about 7:30 p.m. It happened so fast.
Right, Pinky. It was really a very quick turn of events. I remember it happened on a Sunday afternoon. Our team or weekend team rushed to Batangas at around 4 p.m. And at that time, it was just on alert level 3. Then 3 hours after, it moved up to alert level 4. That quick, it really escalated so fast. So you could just understand the residents were really fearful. They were confused because this happened about more than 40 years that the volcano has been silent. So thousands really fled their homes. According to our disaster agency, over 38,000 individuals moved to evacuation centers. There are 200 of them.
And in the beginning, it was ash, first spewing ash at about 2 p.m. And then suddenly, as the hours progressed, there was ash fall. We're not just talking about Tagaytay here. We're talking about it eventually landed also in some parts of Metro Manila and Calabarzon.
That's correct, Pinky. I remember that time, it was at around 7 p.m. when ashfall reached Metro Manila, and people were actually very much confused as to what was happening. People were having dinner out of their homes, some were driving, and suddenly things got quite blurry. But at that time, I remember also, people were already rushing to the drugstores to get their stocks of masks. And back then, marami na rin talaga yung gustong bumili ng N95 masks, but they were already unavailable.
Let's review first the so-called Taal danger zones. So there was that initial 14-kilometer danger zone and then the 17-kilometer danger zone. Everything turned completely gray after the eruption. Batangas, Cavite, Laguna, here Metro Manila, the southern portions most especially, we experienced ashfall. And like you were saying, Tricia, many rushing to buy those N95 masks.
David, you were also in affected areas of the Taal Volcano's eruption in January. We want to show you the map once again on your screens where we can see the 14 and 17 kilometer danger zones and the total population in these areas. And David, you met so many people affected by this eruption. Take us through your observations, reflections, and conversations you had with them.
Well, Rico, just like in many disaster zones we've been through, Batanggenyos in particular, they're masunurin sila. They comply with orders, with government orders, as long as it has to do with their safety and well-being. We also know that Batanggenyos are pious people. They're very religious, prayerful. And just like most of us Filipinos, they're also very resilient. Of course, others might say na with the many disasters we've been through, medyo cliche na yung concept ng Pinoy resiliency. But also, we saw a lot of Batanggenyos also going out of their way, helping fellow Batanggenyos, an indication na buhay yung bayanihan spirit during very difficult times.
Buhay na buhay ang bayanihan spirit, and we also saw the resilience because after the eruption and the ashfall, we immediately saw them clean up because this area is a tourism hub, not only for international visitors but for local tourists as well.
Of course, Taal, who is a favorite tourist destination for many of us. It's close to Metro Manila. It's cool weather. Of course, it's an ideal tourist destination. Marami ring mga lugar na tourist spots sa Batangas. There's Pico de Loro, there's Nasugbu. So, it was a daunting task for many of the people in Batangas to clean up. But ang kanilang goal there is to be able to rise up immediately, recover their economy, and of course, nakarely heavily yung kanilang economy sa tourism. That's why they really had to work really hard with their governments, with their officials to ensure na maibalik kaagad hindi lang yung mga businesses, kundi yung mga turista na laging pupunta sa Batangas.
And President Rodrigo Duterte declared a state of calamity across Calabarzon after Taal's eruption to fast-track the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the victims.
When we return, more on the damage, destruction, and the lasting impact of this volcanic eruption.
As we said, that was just the beginning of what made 2020 a year like no other. This is a CNN Philippines special presentation.
CNN Philippines, Taal Volcano is now on alert level 3.
The plume of smoke and ash just kept rising up for the most part of the afternoon.
'20 is a year for history books. In fact, Time magazine has declared 2020 to be the worst year.
We have seen nothing like this before.
Welcome to a CNN Philippines special presentation 2020, a year like no other as we look back at the defining moments of the past year.
Well, Pia, Pinky, we're talking about how the year began for us. Taal Volcano had a phreatic eruption. It was the first eruption of Taal in more than 40 years. And given the volcano's location, the damage and destruction was the worst in the country's industrial belt, Calabarzon. Region 4A is where we'll find manufacturing facilities for automobile parts, semiconductors, and electronics. And next to Metro Manila, it's in Calabarzon, where we're seeing a significant rise in small and medium enterprises. Imagine the impact to these people and their livelihood. Well, Tricia, take us through the cost of Taal Volcano's eruption.
Well, according to our officials, to the NDRRMC, the damage to agriculture reached to about 3 billion pesos, while to infrastructure, it's almost at 193 million pesos. But just to give you an overview of how it was like that time, you know, there was no power, there was no electricity for days, and some restaurants had to close down or suspend their operations, and that affected hundreds of restaurants at that time.
Tricia, tell us more about how people were leaving the area because we were told may danger zone. People were asked to leave the area. But it took a while for people to follow instructions. Although David did say a little while ago na masunuri naman. But there were people who didn't want to leave.
Right. Some people were, of course, hesitant to leave their homes because it's where their livelihood are as well. I think David was also there when he was covering people leaving their homes. Many were actually following. Many were really hindi sila pasaway, di ba, David?
Right.
Maraming sumusunod.
Basically, there was a constant clash
Yes.
between people who wanted to go back to their homes because they'd been away from their homes for quite some time. They wanted to check on their homes, on their belongings, on their agricultural products, on their farm animals. And then, of course, the authorities were there who wanted to make sure that they're safe. So constantly, back and forth, merong ganung mga tension within the checkpoints that were established. But, you know, largely people complied, as we pointing out, complied with the orders. But then again, meron pa rin mga mangilan-ngilan who defied these orders and insisted to stay on their homes and to look after their belongings.
Yeah, which brings into focus, the tension there is really not just about people leaving their homes, but because they were in areas that are really danger zones. No one really should be building in danger zones, 14, 17 kilometers. But while we were focused on Taal, we were also reporting about a flu-like illness in China.
Specifically in Wuhan, where the coronavirus outbreak was first reported.
Little did we know that this novel coronavirus was going to change our lives forever. A health and economic crisis that was about to hit every corner of the world.
We'd like to introduce our guests for today, former Health Secretary Manuel Dairit and Jonathan Ravelas, BDO Unibank Chief Market Strategist.
And we're also joined by our correspondents, David Santos, Caroline Bonkin, AC Nichols, and Lois Calderon.
By the third week of January, this novel coronavirus began spreading to 4 other countries, including the United States. CNN's David Culver was at the epicenter of the virus in Wuhan just before the lockdown, there on January 24th. Chinese health authorities suspected the virus came from a wet market in the city, which was eventually shut down.
Within a week, on January 30th, 2020, our health officials reported the first case of this novel coronavirus in the country. Caroline, let's go back to how it all began and how quickly things escalated.
So our first case of COVID-19 here in the Philippines is actually a Chinese woman in her 30s, 38 to be exact. So she came here on January 21. So galing siya sa Wuhan, kung saan nanggaling yung unang kaso ng COVID-19. And back then, we only knew it as nCoV 2019 kasi ang dami pang hindi alam tungkol sa virus. It was still the novel coronavirus. It was January 30 when health officials held a press conference saying that we have first confirmed case. And then just after 2 days, another press conference, health officials saying that we have the first COVID death outside China, not just in the Philippines, but in the whole world. We had the first COVID death outside China, and this person was actually the partner of our first COVID case in the Philippines. So he was 44 years old, and he had comorbidity. So meron din siyang ibang mga sakit.
In early February, the government banned travel from mainland China, Hong Kong, and Macau. So, but let's do remember that it was back in January 31 that the president actually stopped or started to ban entry of visitors from Hubei province. Of course, Hubei was on lockdown since January 24.
I want to take us back to March 6. Health authorities reported the first local case of COVID-19.
Dr. Dairit, let us bring you in to this discussion. When you found out about COVID-19, was it a major concern for you, or was it similar to SARS way back in 2003, 2004?
It was a concern for me, Rico. Because with the experience of SARS, I jumped out of my seat. And when I heard that WHO had declared this already as a pandemic, I knew that we were really in for a very big challenge.
Dr. Dairit, I wanted to ask you, did you feel that there was no real sense of urgency, that people didn't really digest what the word pandemic meant, and therefore the mentality was a little bit of a wala yan mentality?
I think at the time, Pia, we were really focused on what was happening in other countries. China, and then soon after that, we were focused on Europe. But really, during the first week of March, I recall there was already a sense of foreboding that something grave was going to happen. And so that sense of denial, I think, eventually just evaporated when the lockdown was declared, almost very, very abruptly, March 13, which was a Friday. And then the lockdown was supposed to be on a Sunday, and then actually it was moved to Monday on March 16, if I recall correctly.
You're right, Secretary Dairit, because during that time that government was going to impose that lockdown, we were speaking to some government officials. I remember back then it was spokesperson Sal Panelo, and we wanted to find out because nung lumabas po yung balita na magkaka-lockdown, what we saw on social media, people were lining up, going to the groceries and trying to get as much food and essentials as they needed. And here in CNN, we were trying to get more information kung matutuloy ba itong lockdown na ito o hindi.
I remember because I was being interviewed by media also. And I know that at around that time, March 5, March 6, when they said that community spread had occurred here in the Philippines, I think that was the sense that the mood, my mood actually darkened at around that time.
Yeah.
And then eventually a week later, the lockdown was actually implemented.
I want to go back to what Pia said, na it's as if at some point, di natin inisip na talagang tatamaan tayo ng ganito. But when those words came out, yung community transmission, I guess that's when we started to take it really seriously.
And we will continue this discussion with Dr. Manuel Dairit when we come back. And after the break, we'll be looking into the steps that were taken by our government to try to contain the virus.
For now, here are images of Manila's empty roads during the lockdown that began on March 17 when the entire Luzon was placed under enhanced community quarantine. You're watching a CNN Philippines special presentation 2020, a year like no other.
Like no other. Welcome to a CNN Philippines special presentation.
We're looking back at the past year. Usually at the end of every year, we say the year went by so quickly.
But not this year. 2020 was the year when the world stopped. We had to take a huge pause.
Life has been on hold for the most part because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The initial response of any government to COVID-19 is to contain and mitigate the virus.
And that meant imposing lockdowns, curfews, quarantine restrictions.
Whatever you want to call it, it was clear we had to stay home. We saw it first in Wuhan, China in January. By February, we saw it in much of Italy, including in the densely populated region of Lombardy. We saw it happening more in other countries. By March, we experienced it here in the Philippines ourselves.
It was on March 15 when the president implemented a community quarantine. Our Caroline Bonquin and David Santos and Lois Calderon are with us. Balikan natin yung mga pangyayari noong March because 2 days after the community quarantine imposed here in Metro Manila, the entire Luzon placed under ECQ, Enhanced Community Quarantine. So let's go back to those days. David, Caroline, and Lois, or the panic buying, the long lines at the groceries, etc.
I guess I can start with the lockdowns, no? Kasi the authorities had to act quickly. They had to set up those quarantine checkpoints. There was so much chaos, long lines in those points because the goal there was to contain the virus as much as possible. Kung nandito lang sa Metro Manila, hindi na siya aabot sa ibang mga lugar. There was the mask mandate, there was sumunod yung face shield, and of course, if we are to compare with other countries, as we've been saying, mas masunurin talaga mga Pinoy. They really complied both with the mask, face mask and face shields. That may be the reason why, comparatively in other countries, mas mababa pa rin tayo, say in US, in other parts of Europe.
And Lois, this lockdown, which is still ongoing, has basically crippled the Philippine economy, its worst recession in close to 30 years.
That's right, Rico. Recession is a very painful process, and behind that negative growth number is a human face. And we're talking here both of the jobless people and those who returned back to poverty. Yung jobless numbers natin, no, record high ito. At when lockdown was strictest in April, the number of the jobless rose to as much as over 7 million. That's according to the Philippine Statistics Authority. But the estimates of the Social Weather Station is even worse at over 27 million Filipinos. The ILO, International Labor Organization, nasa around over 10 million Filipinos. Pero regardless kung ano ang numero, nagkakaiba kasi sa metodolohiya, ang pag-uusapan dito talagang masama ang impact ng lockdown sa kabuhayan ng mga Pilipino. We're also talking here of poverty numbers. Ang estimate ng World Bank is about 2.7 million Filipinos will be added more to the poverty, the population of the poor. Before this 2020, we entered actually the year on a strong economic footing. The government was able to really cut poverty, the population of poor Filipinos, by 6 million. So 6 million Filipinos sana. And 14% ang target. Nasa 17% yan. Tapos ito sana ang taong ito, 14%. But we cannot deny that the lockdown and of course the series of typhoons also could force people to return back to poverty line.
Can you talk to us about those businesses? No? Because yung mga business owners, small, medium enterprises, restaurants, etc., they did put up a heroic effort to try to keep their businesses open. As a matter of fact, so many of them were saying kung kaya lang nila magbayad ng sweldo na walang income, they would do, no? But they just had to close down slowly.
We've heard of stories, very compelling stories. Resort owner, for instance, we covered on the ground, who tried to keep the business afloat, even if they're operating in the red, palugi. At yung mga tao niya, wala siyang tinanggal doon, no? At patuloy na labas yung cash flow. Merong mga donasyon. Pero hindi natin makakaila na merong mga industriya na talagang tinamaan. Una-una dyan yung airlines. Nakita natin libo-libo ang nawalan ng trabaho, ang hotel industry, tourism. These are two sectors that were badly hit by the pandemic and the consequent lockdown.
And Jonathan, we saw the worst economic downturn in the Philippines, no? In close to 30 years. But of course, during this period, you've had the Bayanihan Law 1, the Bayanihan Law 2, and the central bank has cut interest rates several times over. Did this help in any way alleviate a further weakness in the economy this year?
Definitely. I think one of the things to consider is that this the lockdown was not meant to really to cripple the economy, but it actually meant to save lives. What we needed to do during the lockdown and what we saw was to be able to improve our health facilities so that if there will be more cases, we're able to prepare for them. At the same time, provide the health protocols. Now, of course, it affected the economy because everything halted. So imagine that we started the year on a strong note by ending 2019, but suddenly there was a stop sign. So literally the economy halted. That's why, as Lois mentioned, we've seen a lot of disruptions in business.
So it was a delicate balance between trying to keep the economy open, but at the same time restricting people's movements, precisely so that we did not overwhelm our health facilities and our health system.
Yes. I think you need to understand that globally, this is the same storm, different boat. Unlike other countries, they have a lot of money. The Philippines have very little room to wiggle. So we had to look at the best measure that we can do. And the first thing, aside from doing the lockdown, was eventually provide accommodative policy so that businesses that can operate will be allowed to have lower cost of doing business so that the economy will still move.
While we are waiting for that vaccine, and you were talking about MSMEs, the driving force of the economy, what kind of future do you see right now for them, pending possibly even the first time that any vaccine will make it to the country? I mean, you're talking about what? Survival, pivot to the new normal, and repurpose. What's it looking like for them?
I think the first thing that has happened is that this pandemic became a opportunity. I think if we were to look for the opportunity in the pandemic, is basically the shift towards digitalization. Everybody's on the starting line. Whether you're a big company, small company, you can now use the internet as a platform to sell products. It was also one way for the BSP to further reintroduce its financial inclusion by doing digital payments. So those that are able to slowly move into that space, we get to see a lot of them thriving over social media. No?
Now, what about the recovery plan? How does the Philippine economy get back on its feet? Here is what Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez had to say earlier this month.
The economy is just waiting for this fear factor to be removed, for people to have confidence that they will not get sick. And this economy, believe me, is going to boom.
Let's get back to Jonathan there. Listening to what Secretary Dominguez said, your thoughts?
Okay, I think the most important word that he used, and I tend to agree, is the word confidence. Right now, I think in terms of what the government has done is basically use the letter W, whatever it takes. No? They've eventually done Bayanihan 1, 2, they've done monetary policies. Now we're moving to the third aspect, which is the fiscal spending. And this is one thing that's very critical as we move to 2021.
Over the past weeks, we have been seeing the first signs of hope. People in different parts of the world getting the much-awaited vaccine against this deadly coronavirus. At tamang-tamang timing.
That's
Pasko.
right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and Pinky, and many are describing it as the beginning of the end of a very painful time in our history. 2020 is a year like no other. This is a CNN Philippines special presentation. The COVID-19 pandemic is changing the world that we live in, and it has taken over every aspect of our lives.
It's been a grueling year, a brutally painful last several months.
But there is hope and optimism. And as we close this difficult year, we're finally seeing signs that someday soon, we too shall overcome some of the harsh realities of this pandemic.
And speaking of harsh realities, Pinky, Pia, COVID-19 has had a severe impact on education. If you remember, the President said on May the 26th, there will be no face-to-face classes until a COVID-19 vaccine is available.
Our AC Nichols joins us live. She's been closely monitoring what the Education Department is doing, how the teachers, students, and parents are coping. AC, let's go back to March when quarantine restrictions were first imposed.
Well, as soon as quarantine restrictions were implemented in mid-March, students felt the impact right away. That was around the same period for final exams, and ang ending is the final exams were called off. And as lockdowns were extended in April onwards, graduation and moving up ceremonies were either postponed indefinitely, done virtually, or canceled altogether. In total, around 27 million students in basic education levels and another 3 million more students in college were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Now, over the summer months, education officials introduced the concept of distance or remote learning. It was much harder than we all imagined, right, AC?
Yes, sadly that's true. Lahat talaga nanibago, no? And what happened was education officials came up with guidelines for distance learning or remote learning. Sometimes they also call it blended learning. So the proposal was for a combination of alternative learning delivery modes, which will essentially allow students to continue with their education while they stay at home. So meron diyang online mixed with TV, radio, and printed materials. And that proposal was met with criticisms from the get-go. Siyempre, napakahirap para sa mga bata because they had been cooped up already in their homes over the summer, and they wanted to physically be back in their classrooms and see their friends. So, naging mahirap talagang adjustments para sa lahat. And for the parents naman, they worried about additional expenses such as gadgets and internet connection. Hindi naman lahat ay may Wi-Fi sa bahay. And another problem, who will watch over the kids while they study at home and the parents were working? Of course, not everybody can afford to hire help.
Yeah, well, also, very briefly, us parents were worried also. I have a 9-year-old son. I put myself in charge of his schooling. It felt like, and like the other parents, it felt like kami enrolled. Hindi lang yung bata. Diba, AC? But Rico, go ahead.
That's right. It's like we went back to school.
Right.
And it looked back through our textbooks way back in grade school.
And then we realized we weren't paying attention pala, no?
You are being tested.
Yes,
Now on to the record-breaking push to develop and distribute COVID-19 vaccines, and it was administered by a Filipina nurse. How long are we supposed to wait here in the Philippines? Our Carolyn Bonquin joins us again. Also, former Health Secretary Manuel Dairit. Dr. Dairit, let me start off with you. Where are we right now on the vaccines? When are we going to get it here in the country?
At the moment, Rico, Department of Health and Secretary Galvez are actually in the process of negotiating the procurement of vaccines. So they are in conversation with at least 3 vaccine manufacturers, including AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Sinovac, Novavax. And they are looking to actually be able to have vaccinations as early as late March or April. This is as quick as they want to get these vaccinations here in the country.
Secretary Galvez has been saying by March, hopefully, sabi ni Secretary Galvez. Are we still on track, Carolyn? What's the latest?
So far, that's still the target. But ang sure pa lang kasi ngayon is we'll get the vaccine from AstraZeneca initially by around May or June. But it will all still depend on our negotiation, our talks with the other vaccine manufacturers. And currently, the Philippine government and the private sector is talking to at least 22 vaccine manufacturers.
Secretary Dairit, of course, these vaccines are all emergency use. vaccines. And what is astounding here is how quickly the pharmaceutical firms have been able to manufacture, get these vaccines, up and running and on the ground. Normally, this is like 5 to 10 years, hindi ba? But now the times call for immediate relief.
That's right, Pia. Even I was quite amazed at how quickly they moved. Because as of the discussions in the middle of the year, they were thinking that the vaccines would only be able to complete their clinical trials by 2021. But today, as we've seen, a number have completed clinical trials and are actually rolling it out, particularly UK, in the US, and in other countries, including Australia.
How long do we wait for the vaccine? The answer remains up in the air.
For now, it's about learning to live with the virus because it isn't going away anytime soon.
And when we return, what happens when natural disasters strike in the middle of a pandemic? This is a CNN Philippines special presentation, 2020, a year like no other.
To a place, guide us with your grace, give us faith so well. Every time you break me and every time you leave. Continue to obey the protocol.
대박이다.
'20 was a year filled with fear. There was anxiety and so much uncertainty.
The coronavirus left us vulnerable, but just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, Mother Nature struck again and again.
3 back-to-back storms slammed across many parts of the country. Quinta, Rolly, and Ulysses made life even more challenging, more difficult, and much harder to bear.
Our Rex Remigio and George Cahiles were among CNN Philippines correspondents who were deployed to affected areas.
Well, the Philippines is one of the riskiest and most vulnerable countries in the world, prone to storms, floods, and earthquakes. George and Rex, nakausap ninyo ang mga survivors. Anong sinabi ng marami sa kanila? Malas daw.
Nung nakarating nga ako sa Cagayan, para talagang nilamon ng Cagayan River yung maraming bayan doon. Ang sinasabi ng mga tao, hindi raw kagad sila naabisuhan na magpapakawala ng tubig doon sa 7 dam ng Magat Dam. Kung kaya ang nangyari ay talagang napansin na lang nila na biglang tumaas yung tubig hanggang sa umabot na to lagpas tao at wala silang nagawa kundi magkubli na lang doon sa kanilang mga bubong hanggang makarating yung rescue na ilabot rin ng ilang oras kundi man araw. Doon naman sa Southern Luzon, hindi naman naging problema yung pagbaha, ngunit yung pagkasira ng mga bahay. Kung kaya't ang sinasabi nga, di ba, ng ating mga otoridad, stay at home. Pero wala silang home ngayon na mapapagstayan yung ilang mga evacuees doon. Kung kaya't ang isa sa mga inaalala nila ay yung COVID-19 sa mga evacuation center. Ang ginawa ng mga otoridad, talagang pinairal nila yung physical distancing, pagsusuot ng mask, at maging yung palagiang paghuhugas ng kamay sa mga evacuees.
Yung malas kasi, it's a concept ng kulturang Pilipino, ano? It's the easiest way to explain kung ano yung nangyayaring sunod-sunod na paghihirap o hindi magandang nangyari sa pamilya nila. For instance, sa Bicol, may isang pamilya doon na wala ng trabaho yung tatay. After a while, dalawang anak niya na aksidente, na ospital, wala silang pambayad. Tapos dumating yung bagyong Rolly, kung ano pa yung meron sila, nawala lahat dahil sinira na nung bagyo. So ganun yung pinakamadaling paraan nila para ipaliwanag yung mga nangyari sa kanila nitong taong 2020. Malas nga daw.
George and Rex, I wanted to ask you this, do we just make the mistake of calling the storm, the typhoon, a disaster when actually what storms and typhoons are natural hazards? And the problem is, it is we, people, who get in the way of nature.
Well, exactly, Pia. No? Kasi at this point, experts are saying that we are abusing our environment. Na dapat itong mga bagyo, pinaghahandaan ng mga tao. No matter how much we prepare, sometimes naabuso na natin yung environment. So we are now bearing the brunt of nature's wrath. Kaya mas maigi pa rin na pinaghahandaan natin every now and then.
At isa pa dyan, George, yung idea ng resiliency. Kasi, di ba, madalas nasasabi na ang Pilipino ay sanay sa mga bagyo. Kahit ano pang unos yung dumating, talagang kayang makabangon mulit-muli. Pero tumataas na rin yung kamalayan ng mga tao, ayon sa ilang eksperto, pagdating nga doon sa to make our leaders accountable. Kung halimbawa sa case ng pagbaha doon sa Cagayan, kung talaga nga bang nagkaroon ng pag-abiso sa mga tao na magpapakawala sila ng tubig mula sa dam, gayon na rin yung kung sapat nga ba yung pag-abiso sa kanila at maging yung kung sapat ba yung rescue equipment nila. So, kumbaga, yung mga tao nagtatanong na rin, bakit pa ulit-ulit na lang to at kailangan ba namin na laging maging resilient tuwing may bagyo?
Pero yun na nga ang tanong baka hindi naman ang tanong doon hindi yung rescue equipment, relief assistance, but the fact that we do get in the way of nature because, for example, Cagayan River, when it overflows, that's because people are, there are settlements that are along the river, for example, Provident Village, Marikina, nangyari na yan nung Undoy, nangyari na naman ulit. But anyway, let's move on to this. Let's talk about the stunning price tag of these last three storms, enormous amid this raging pandemic, these 35 billion pesos. According to the NDRRMC's latest figures, government also placing the entire Luzon under a state of calamity. Let's talk about that, George and Rex. And about this, yung sinasabi na nga ninyo, paulit-ulit, hindi naman ito an issue of resiliency.
That's correct, Pia. Actually, yung kalakihan sa mga damages na yan is on agriculture na batayang kinabubuhay ng marami sa mga Pilipino. And in addition to that, 153 people died. Yun yung isa sa pinakamalaking sigurong sabihin nating naging dagok na naranasan ng Pilipinas dahil dito sa mga calamity na ito.
Kung kaya't ang plano nga nila, ang nangyari kasi halimbawa sa Cagayan, tinuturo nila yung illegal logging bilang reason kung bakit mas malawak yung pagbaha doon. Ang ginawa nila is that, number one, magkakaroon daw ng malawakang reforestation project at particular dito yung pagtatanim ng mga native trees sa gilid ng ilog para merong tubig na sumalo mula sa taas ng bundok. Kasi kung wala daw ito, tuloy-tuloy lang yung tubig mula doon sa taas ng bundok, talagang mas mabilis ang pagbaha.
At ang mahirap dyan, Rex, and even George, pag pinag-uusapan kasi na nakakalbo na yung mga bundok, andun lahat pinag-uusapan, illegal logging, anong dapat gawin, illegal mining, isama mo na dyan. Diba, George, nandun ka nga sa Mayon, around Mayon that time. Remember, merong nakitang, unfortunately patay, doon sa parang ilog doon. Ang problema kasi talaga siguro dito, yung follow-through, ano nangyayari pagkatapos ng mga sakuna at masasamang nangyari yung mga kalamidad na ito?
Exactly, Pinky. Kasi pagdating pa lang natin sa site sa Ginubatan, yun yung sinusumbong sa atin ng mga tao dahil ito sa quarrying activity surrounding Mayon Volcano. Kahit nga sa kahit sa Rizal, yung sa area ng Rodriguez, yung mga tao din, yun din yung sinusumbong sa media. Dahil sa quarrying activities, kaya nagkakaroon ng ganito kalalang baha. So sa case ng Bicol, fortunately, President Duterte went there at nakapagsumbong din yung mga tao sa kanya. So he ordered a probe. Ngayon yung Senado, nag-iimbestiga din sila. And the local government of Rizal said that they stopped temporarily stopped the activities of mining or quarrying activities dyan sa Rizal area.
Maraming salamat. Thank you to our Rex Remitio and George Cahiles, and to our other correspondents who joined us earlier, AC Nichols and David Santos.
We also had joining us Caroline Bonquin, Lois Calderon, and our Tricia Terrada.
Also grateful to our guests, former Health Secretary Manuel Dairit and Jonathan Ravelas. 2020 has been a year like no other, a year of unprecedented change affecting every aspect of our lives in every corner of the world.
It brought the best and the worst in people, but it also kept the world together while we stayed apart.
Nothing compares to the year that 2020 has been, and while the year is coming to a close, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic isn't ending along with it.
But it was a year of endless learning, a year to discover and evolve that will help prepare us for 2021. I'm Pia Hontiveros.
I'm Pinky Webb.
I'm Rico Hizon. This has been a CNN Philippines special presentation.